Professor Nix observed his diverse classroom with his 4 crystalline eyes, noting how the new human student, Mira Davidson, sat alone at the edge of the room. The Galactic Academy of Cultural Studies prided itself on fostering understanding between species, yet after 3 cycles, none of the other students had warmed up to their Earthborn classmate. The professor's iridescent scales shifted to a contemplative blue as he watched a young Floridian student, Tharix, physically recoil when Mira accidentally brushed past his desk. The reaction wasn't surprising. Earth's classification as a Deathworld had sparked countless rumors across the galaxy. Today's assignment, Professor Nix announced, his voice resonating through the crystalline chambers of the classroom, will challenge your preconceptions. Each of you will create a comprehensive presentation about your homeworld's most dangerous aspects, both geological and biological. Excited murmurs filled the room as students from the same planets immediately grouped together. Mira remained seated, alone, her expression unreadable. Being the only human at the academy meant she would work solo. The presentation will account for 40% of your final grade, Professor Nix continued. You have 3 cycles to prepare. Remember, the goal is to help us understand the challenges each species has overcome to reach the stars. As the class dispersed, Professor Nix noticed Mira lingering behind. Professor, she said, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort, do you really want me to show them everything about Earth? The professor's scales rippled with amber amusement. My dear, I want you to show them the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. Mira nodded, but her expression was troubled. She knew what her classmates thought of Earth, a savage planet where evolution had run amok, producing creatures and conditions so lethal that most species considered it uninhabitable. How could she explain that humans didn't just survive there, they thrived? Over the next few days, Mira worked diligently in the Academy's vast holographic library, compiling data about Earth. She noticed other students watching her from behind data terminals, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. A young Nexarian named Vex had spread a rumor that humans had evolved from apex predators, which explained their unnaturally high endurance and aggression levels. What they didn't understand was that Earth's extreme conditions had forged humanity into something unique. Humans weren't the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but they possessed a combination of traits that made them remarkably adaptable. As Mira compiled her presentation, she decided to show her classmates not just Earth's dangers, but how humans had learned to overcome them. She included footage of everything from weather phenomena to wildlife, from natural disasters to the daily challenges that humans considered normal. The night before the presentations were due, Mira received an unexpected message from Professor Nix. Remember, Miss Davidson, sometimes the most powerful lessons come from showing others what we consider ordinary. She smiled, finally understanding why the professor had assigned this project. Tomorrow, her classmates would learn that their fear of Earth and its inhabitants stemmed not from its true nature, but from their own limited perspective, and perhaps, just perhaps, they would begin to see her differently too. The presentation hall hummed with nervous energy as the first group took their position at the holoprojector. 3 luminarians, their bioluminescent skin pulsing with anticipation, began their presentation about their homeworld, Luminos. Our world's greatest threat, began Astra, her skin flickering in rhythm with her words, comes from our binary star system. The holoprojector displayed massive solar flares dancing across their sky. These stellar storms can ionize our entire atmosphere. The class watched in awe as footage showed luminarian cities activating their electromagnetic shields. Mira, however, found herself more fascinated by how the luminarians had adapted to live in perpetual daylight, their crystalline cities refracting and channeling the intense radiation. Next came the Aquilians, a species of avian humanoids. Their presenter, Corax, spread his metallic feathers proudly as he described the massive flying predators of their world. The Sky Reapers can swallow an Aquilian whole, he declared, showing footage of serpentine creatures gliding through clouds. Mira noticed something familiar about the hunting patterns. They moved like Earth's peregrine falcons, just on a larger scale. She made a note in her tablet, wondering if her classmates realized that size wasn't everything when it came to predators. The most dramatic presentation came from Zix, a terramorph whose silicon-based body could reshape itself at will. Our planet's surface regularly liquefies due to tectonic activity. They demonstrated, shifting their own form to mimic the flowing ground. Only our ability to adapt our physical structure allows us to survive. During each presentation, Mira observed her classmates' reactions. They gasped at the right moments, showed appropriate fear at the dangers described, but she noticed something interesting. Each species presented their adaptations as extraordinary, while viewing their world's dangers as normal. Professor Nix's scales had shifted to a deep purple of satisfaction. He too was watching the students, but his attention seemed focused on their assumptions rather than their presentations. The final presentation before Mira's came from a group of voidborn, species adapted to life in deep space. Their representative, Nexus, projected images of cosmic radiation and solar winds that would tear apart most organic matter. Our bodies generate natural force fields, they explained, demonstrating by allowing a small laser to deflect off their skin. As applause filled the room for the voidborn presentation, Mira felt her heart rate increase. Tomorrow, she would have to show them Earth. Not the exaggerated stories they'd heard, but the real Earth, with its constantly changing conditions, diverse ecosystems, and the countless ways humans had learned to adapt without natural armor, without built-in defenses, without genetic engineering. She caught Professor Nix watching her, his scales now showing hints of anticipatory gold. He gave her a subtle nod, and she realized something crucial. While her classmates had showcased their species' greatest defensive adaptations, none had mentioned offensive capabilities. None had talked about how their species had learned to actively overcome their world's challenges rather than just survive them. Tomorrow, she would show them something different. Tomorrow, they would learn why Earth was called a Deathworld, not because it was uninhabitable, but because it had forged its inhabitants into something unique in the galaxy, a species that didn't just adapt to survive their environment, but learned to thrive in spite of it. As the class dispersed, Mira overheard Vex whispering to a group of students, "Wait until you see what horrors the Deathworlder shows us tomorrow." She smiled to herself, knowing that the real horror wouldn't be in what she showed them, but in their realization of how wrong their assumptions had been all along. The next day, Mira stood before her class, her heart steady despite the anticipation building in her chest. She had decided against wearing her environmental suit, the standard protection most species assumed humans needed to survive off-world. Instead, she wore her regular academy uniform, a silent statement about human adaptability. "My presentation," she began, her voice clear and confident, "isn't about a single threat or a specific predator. It's about Earth itself." She activated the holoprojector, and the room filled with a three-dimensional image of her home planet. "Earth isn't a death world because it's universally hostile," Mira continued, zooming in on different regions. "It's a death world because it's never the same threat twice." The first images showed a time-lapse of a single location experiencing all 4 seasons. Several students flinched as they watched the environment transform from frozen wasteland to flourishing green to scorching heat and back again. Humans don't just survive in one environment, we thrive in all of them. "But that's impossible," interrupted Vex, his crystalline form vibrating with disbelief. "No species can adapt to such extreme variations." "We didn't adapt," Mira replied with a slight smile. "We innovated." The hologround shifted to show humans living in the Arctic, the Sahara, deep oceans, and high mountains. While other species evolved specific defenses against specific threats, we developed something different, adaptability itself. The classroom fell silent as she displayed footage of natural disasters. Earthquakes reshaping landscapes, volcanoes erupting, hurricanes devastating coastlines. These aren't rare events on Earth. They're part of our normal existence. Professor Nix's scales had turned a deep indigo of fascination as Mira moved to the biological portion of her presentation. Earth's biodiversity exceeds that of most known planets, she explained, showing a rapid succession of predators: lions, bears, sharks, and more. But here's what makes Earth unique. She paused, making eye contact with her classmates. We're not the strongest. Images of gorillas displaying their strength. We're not the fastest. Cheetahs running at full speed. We're not naturally armored. Close-ups of rhinoceros hide and armadillo shells. We're not even the most intelligent by raw neural capacity. Dolphins solving complex problems. Then how? Began Tharix, his floating form drawing closer to the display. Because we learned from all of them, Mira explained. The hologram showed early humans using tools, creating fire, building shelters. We observed, we learned, we adapted our behavior rather than our bodies. And most importantly, we endured. The final portion of her presentation shocked even Professor Nix. Mira showed human children playing in snow, swimming in oceans, climbing trees, doing things that would be considered extremely dangerous on other worlds. On Earth, we don't just survive our environment, we learn to enjoy it. As she concluded, the room remained silent. Her classmates stared at her with new eyes, finally understanding. Earth wasn't called a Deathworld because it was uninhabitable. It was called a Deathworld because it had created a species that could inhabit anywhere. Professor Nix's scales had shifted to a bright gold of approval. "Thank you, Miss Davidson," he said softly. "I believe you've given us all something to think about." As Mira returned to her seat, she noticed something had changed. The other students weren't leaning away anymore. Instead, they were watching her with a mixture of fascination and newfound respect. She had shown them that being from a Deathworld didn't make humans monsters, it made them survivors. In the days following Mira's presentation, the atmosphere in Professor Nix's classroom shifted dramatically. The empty seats around her gradually filled as curiosity overcame fear. It began with Tharix, the Floridian student, who tentatively approached her during their molecular biology session. "Is it true," he asked, his floating form bobbing nervously, "that humans deliberately expose themselves to controlled amounts of solar radiation for pleasure?" Mira couldn't help but smile. "You mean sunbathing?" "Yes, though we have to be careful not to overdo it. Our skin produces vital nutrients from sunlight, but too much can harm us." "Fascinating," Tharix hummed. "Your species intentionally balances on the edge of danger to gain benefits. We Floridians would never consider such a thing." The conversation attracted others. Astra, the luminarian, joined them, her bioluminescent patterns showing intense interest. "I've been reviewing your presentation data," she said. "Humans sleep for approximately 1/3 of each planetary rotation, leaving themselves completely vulnerable to predators. We developed communities and built shelters specifically to make sleep safer," Mira explained. "We adapt our environment when we can't adapt ourselves." Professor Nix observed these interactions with shifting colors of satisfaction rippling through his scales. His experiment was working better than he'd hoped. Even Vex, who had been one of the most vocal about human savagery, had begun to ask thoughtful questions. During their xenobiology practical, Vex watched Mira handle various alien specimens with bare hands. "Don't you need protection?" he asked, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns of confusion. "Human skin is remarkably resistant," Mira explained, showing him her calloused palms. "We can build up tolerance to almost anything through gradual exposure. It's how we adapt." The real breakthrough came during an unexpected emergency. The Academy's atmospheric regulators malfunctioned, causing the temperature to plummet in their section. While other species quickly donned environmental suits, Mira simply pulled a jacket from her bag and continued working. "You're not in distress?" Corax, the Aquilian, asked in amazement. Mira laughed. "This is like a mild winter day where I grew up. Humans can survive in temperatures from well below freezing to well above what most species consider habitable. We just need to prepare properly. Professor Nix used the incident as a teaching opportunity. Consider, he said, his scales now a deep educational purple, how this adaptability might have influenced human technological development. While many species developed single solutions for permanent environmental challenges, humans created multiple solutions for varying conditions. The class discussed this insight with growing enthusiasm. They began to see that what they had mistaken for primitive resilience was actually a sophisticated form of adaptation. Humans hadn't just survived Earth's challenges, they had turned those challenges into opportunities for growth. During their evening meal period, Mira found herself surrounded by classmates eager to learn more. They shared their own world's challenges, but now with a different perspective. Instead of competing to prove which world was more dangerous, they began exploring how different species had developed unique solutions to universal problems. Perhaps, Nexus the Voidborn mused, this is why humans have adapted so quickly to space travel. You're already used to adapting to new environments. As they taught, Mira realized that Professor Nix's assignment had achieved something remarkable. It hadn't just taught her classmates about Earth, it had helped them understand that different evolutionary paths could lead to equally valid solutions. The fear of the unknown that had isolated her was being replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. Professor Nix announced their next assignment with an unusual shimmer of excitement in his scales. You will work in mixed species teams to design survival strategies for randomly assigned environments. His 4 eyes swept the classroom. And yes, this means stepping out of your environmental comfort zones. The class buzzed with anticipation as the teams were announced. Mira found herself grouped with Vex, Astra, and Corax, a human, a crystalline being, a Luminarian, and an Aquilian. Their assigned environment, an ice planet with frequent methane storms. Well, Mira said, breaking the initial awkward silence, this should be interesting. They gathered in one of the Academy's collaborative spaces, surrounded by holographic displays of their assigned planet. Vex's crystalline forms sparkled with nervous energy. The methane storms would shatter my outer matrix within minutes. And my bioluminescence would be useless in such conditions, Astra added, her natural glow dimming slightly. Corax ruffled his metallic feathers. My wings would freeze solid. Perfect, Mira said, earning surprised looks from her teammates. This is exactly why we need each other. On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Over the next few days, they worked together, combining their unique perspectives. Mira introduced them to the concept of brainstorming, throwing out ideas without judgment, no matter how impossible they seemed at first. What if, Corax suggested during one session, we used my understanding of aerodynamics to design better storm shelters? And my crystalline structure could be studied to develop stronger building materials, Vex added, his earlier skepticism about humans forgotten in the excitement of creation. Astra's bioluminescence pulsed with inspiration. My light-based communication could be adapted for emergency signaling through the methane clouds. Mira watched her teammates with growing pride. They weren't just solving problems, they were learning to see their differences as advantages rather than barriers. During their research, they discovered something unexpected. Look at this, Mira pointed to historical data. Every species here developed space travel for different reasons. Vex people sought new crystal formations. Astras wanted to study distant light sources. Corax's ancestors followed cosmic wind patterns. And humans? Astra asked, her glow reflecting genuine curiosity. We looked up at the stars and simply asked, what if? Mira smiled. That's our greatest adaptation. We dream beyond our limitations. Their presentation day approached, and Professor Nix's scales shifted through rainbow hues as he watched the team's work. He noticed how Mira's team had changed. They no longer maintained careful physical distances from each other. Vex actually leaned close to examine Mira's sketches, his crystalline form catching and refracting the light from Astra's excited glow. The night before their presentation, they gathered in the virtual reality chamber to do a final run-through. As the simulated methane storms raged around their designed shelter, Korax turned to Mira. "I understand now," he said softly, "why humans succeeded on Earth. You never saw challenges as obstacles, you saw them as puzzles to be solved." Vex's surface rippled in agreement. "We evolved to survive our world's specific dangers, but you evolved to overcome any danger." Astra's glow pulsed thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's why Earth is called a Deathworld, not because it's more dangerous, but because it created a species that refuses to accept limitations." Mira felt something warm in her chest, not just pride in her heritage, but joy in finding friends who finally understood. They had moved beyond mere tolerance to genuine appreciation of their differences. As they finalized their presentation, Professor Nix appeared in the chamber, his scales a deep gold of approval. "I see you've learned the most important lesson," he said. "True adaptation isn't about becoming immune to challenges, it's about learning to face them together." The final presentation day transformed the Academy's grand auditorium into a showcase of interspecies cooperation. Not just Professor Nix, but the entire faculty attended, their interest piqued by rumors of unprecedented collaboration between the students. Mira's team stood ready, their nervous energy manifesting in different ways. Vex's crystalline surface shimmering, Astra's bioluminescence flickering, and Korax's feathers subtly rustling. Mira felt her own heart racing, but for the first time, she wasn't alone in her excitement. "Our challenge," Mira began, activating the holographic display, wasn't just to survive an ice planet with methane storms. It was to prove that our differences make us stronger together. The auditorium darkened as their simulation engaged. A massive shelter appeared, its design incorporating elements from all their species. The outer layer used principles from Vex's crystalline structure, creating a lattice that could flex under pressure rather than shatter. Beneath it, Korax's understanding of aerodynamics had shaped wind channels that diverted the methane storm's force. "But survival isn't enough," Astra continued, her glow synchronized with the presentation's lighting. "We needed to build a community." The simulation showed interior spaces where each species could thrive, connected by adaptive environments that allowed free movement and interaction. Vex stepped forward, his voice resonating through his crystal form. "We discovered that every weakness could become a strength. My rigid structure taught us about architectural stability. Astra's light-based communication inspired our emergency systems. Korax's sensitivity to air currents helped us design better ventilation." "And the human perspective?" Professor Nix asked, his scales showing deep interest. "We contributed what Earth taught us," Mira explained. "The ability to see problems as opportunities, to adapt not just our environment, but our behavior. To understand that strength comes in many forms." Their presentation concluded with a stunning demonstration. The simulation subjected their shelter to a massive methane storm, but instead of just enduring it, their design harvested the storm's energy, converted the methane into usable fuel, and maintained a thriving community within. The applause was thunderous, but what followed was even more remarkable. Other teams presented similar breakthroughs. A group had designed underwater colonies, combining luminary and light technology with human diving techniques. Another created floating cities that used Aquilian wind-riding principles alongside Earth's weather prediction systems. As the presentations concluded, Professor Nix addressed the assembly, his scales radiating a brilliant spectrum of colors. "Today marks a turning point in our understanding of adaptation. We've learned that true strength isn't about surviving alone, it's about thriving together." He turned to Mira and her teammates. "When we first labeled Earth a Deathworld, we thought we were describing its dangers. Instead, we were acknowledging its gift to the galaxy, a species that taught us how to turn challenges into opportunities and differences into strengths." The academic year ended with a transformation. The Galactic Academy revised its curriculum, emphasizing collaborative problem-solving across species. Mira's project became a model for future classes, and the term Deathworld took on a new meaning, not a place of fear, but a crucible of innovation. In their final class, Vex approached Mira with an unusual request. Would you tell us more about Earth? Not just its dangers, but its beauty. Mira smiled, looking around at her friends, no longer alien classmates, but partners in discovery. Earth's greatest beauty, she said, isn't in its challenges or even in how we overcame them. It's in how they taught us to reach out to others, to share our stories, and to build something greater than ourselves. As they left the academy for their respective worlds, they carried with them a new understanding. Sometimes, the most hostile environments create the strongest bonds. And perhaps that was Earth's greatest lesson, that in a universe full of Deathworlds, the key to survival isn't isolation, but connection. Professor Nix watched them depart, his scales settling into a peaceful golden glow. The experiment had succeeded beyond his expectations. In teaching others about Earth, Mira had helped pioneer a new way of seeing the galaxy, not as a collection of separate worlds to be feared, but as an interconnected community of different strengths waiting to be shared.